Welcome back. This is the altered format. Because as I said in the ending of my last part, I forgot to record a section. So we will cover the content of that, plus get a conclusion of what we were planning to do. Unfortunately, Mike had something to attend to in the meanwhile, so that's why it was cut short. That will happen next time, as we have agreed on a more formal timing to sort this out. Let's begin with our first thing. Last time I was talking about atheism. Let's go into here. Which one first?
Okay, let's begin with this. Now, I would like to continue and present the Theist take, which is that Theism means different things to many different people. For me personally, my faith is based on the gospel message, which is that the gospel is the good news that Jesus
Sorry,
Christ.
Mike. Sorry.
Oh,
Can you speak? Can you turn up what we're on louder at all? If it's loud as you can get, that's fine.
okay, let's see if this works. How does that sound?
Better. It's
Ah,
good.
okay, good. I put the volume all the way up. Great. I do need a new mic.
Keep
So to
going.
clarify the theist position, there's definitely so many faiths out there, and there's so many definitions of faith. So my personal definition of faith, to put in the simplest way possible, is the gospel message. And the gospel is the good news that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, died for our sins and rose again, eternally triumphant over his enemies, so that there is now no condemnation for those who believe, but only everlasting joy. And the basis of faith in reality, the origins of faith as a theistic doctrine, begin actually from the beginning of human history. And how I define human history in this case is the early civilization. So one of the earliest civilizations is Sumeria. And of course, they have their own variation on the faith, a totally different religion to that of my own. And of course, as human history has gone on, faith has provided the beginning of many great civilizations. Now, I'll carry on to the
Oh,
next
sorry. Yeah, here
source.
we go. Here we go. Yeah. Back in. Sorry.
No worries. The next source up above, which reads faith to begin with, just the one next to this one.
Oh, sure. Well, no, next. Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, easy. And effectively, what faith actually means, it means different things even within the Christian faith itself. It's essentially a collection of virtues, and faith in itself also in Christianity means our relationship to the supreme being, God. Some of the things that pistis means include trust, faithfulness, or belief, all synonyms, relatively speaking, of one another. And so, another example of faith, of the faith that I subscribe to, is that in which you see what you believe. So, the typical version of faith, in a lot of cases, when you're looking for proof of something, you want to see it with your own eyes. But for me, I feel that I believe in testimony personally. And what I also believe in is that blessed are those who have not seen yet believe, to bring the example of Christ and Thomas, the disbelieving apostle. Now, I think another great aspect of faith, and this is even from the beginning of human history, is in the Old Testament, the covenant between Israel and their creator God. And
Mike.
yes,
Sorry to push you on, but can you cover this one as well?
okay,
Uh,
no worries. This
because we've
definition
got
over
other stuff
here,
to cover.
no worries. I'll move on here. Thanks, Brennan, keeping me on track. Now, this is going to be foundational to the topic we're going to discuss in the third video we're going to make that comes up right after this. It essentially discusses how the Christian view on war has been the foundational basis of relations between civilizations. And it's started in ancient times from people of another faith, of the pagan faith in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And it's been codified as of recently, the idea of a just war. That war can actually be justified, and that war can be righteous. And effectively, the meaning of a righteous war is that it's a lesser evil, essentially, because the injustice that is going to be corrected by making war to have peace, it essentially prevents the current injustice within the world. That's the just war theory in a nutshell, as explained by Augustine, who's a really famous Christian apologist, even though I haven't personally read too much from him. He's an early church father, 4th century.
Anyway, good. That's fine for now. And and as I said as I said before this, I will allow you to go on into more detail in the next section. But let's keep on point. Okay. Do you remember, Mike, when I was talking about anti-theism, right? And you had your own definition. So before I go into showing you what is anti-theism, what do you still think it is?
Okay, anti-theism is essentially critiquing the beliefs that religious people hold, and not necessarily criticism of religious people themselves.
Close enough.
To put it simply.
Close enough, close enough. These are some elements which explains it.
And we pretended as a society that faith is a virtue and that these things are necessary and important parts of our civilization. You see the harm that it does. So yes, I agree with what your question was. Yes, it can make you feel very alienated. It can make you feel very isolated. But if you're asking me, my own personal opinion, I think that it's the only moral way to proceed. That this is something that is so clearly harmful that I don't care if it permeates my society, and I don't care if it makes me an outcast, and I don't care if I'm going to suffer significant social stigma. I am going to continue to speak out against it because it's hurting people. And I care more about people than I do about tradition, culture, family, whatever. Like I care a lot less about that than I do about human lives and well-being.
He's only one case. The next thing is this one.
Can I just add something to what Boris said, Carlos? Yeah, because I don't know. So first, I just want to mention that. So Boris is very brave and he's willing to pay a high price for his activism, but not everybody has to pay that price. You could be anti-theist and not talk about it. Like when we say somebody is anti-theist, they could, if they don't want to pay the price, and if they're not comfortable, or if they're living in conditions, being an anti-theist just means that you have certain views. It doesn't necessarily come with you being outspoken about it. You could keep your anti-theism views to yourself if you want, or if you don't think that it's worth it in the conditions that you're in. And also, I do think the word anti-theist gives people the wrong impression. I think if anti-theism is what we're going for, but anti-theist just sounds nicer. Just add.
And is any thoughts from those two clips so far?
Anti-theism. The truth of the matter is that when it comes to freedom of expression, there's whatever you think about, you should be allowed to express in some way. So for me, I really admire their stand on principle, that they have such a strong conviction. And it's an interesting thing to have such theories in a place where there's free speech in a democracy, because essentially these guys are the minority worldwide. There's more people who are at least culturally religious than those who aren't. So I do find it an interesting theory to study in principle.
Something to note though here is that, for context about Forrest Falkai is formerly religious himself. So he came from it. So And as you know, I'm formerly religious myself as well, and there seems to be a trend within this skill. Come on.
Okay.
Sorry, this thing's not wanting to move up right now, and I need to need it to get these sidebars. Come on, hurry up. Come on, system. There we go. Next clip.
And also, I do think the word anti-theist gives people a lot, the wrong impression. I think if anti-theism is what we're going for, but anti-theist just sounds nicer because
That is a really good
we are not but we are not against religious people. We're against bad beliefs. We're against beliefs that don't match reality, right? So, but we don't hate the religious people themselves. We think we actually, a lot of the activism that we do against religion is for the sake of religious people because they are the main victims of religion. And also the reason why I think we are anti-theism is because we are against all harmful beliefs, and religion just is a big part of it. Any belief that doesn't match reality or is very far off from reality is harmful to society. So we are at war with all forms of beliefs that are harmful to society. And also,
I used to say, yeah, it loops ignore that part. And that's and let me explain rationale here. What it says to protect the religious people themselves, there's a aspect within this of false hope and actual hope, right? Do you know the difference between the two?
I understand the context you're talking about, false
Yes,
hope.
correct. Basically, the point here is, okay, based on that minute clip, what do you get from it?
There's definitely an element of activism involved in his particular case, in the way how he's promoting his message, I suppose, of anti-theism. And definitely he's trying to find like-minded other people to join up with him in his activism. And I guess it's sort of like a funny question. I guess I should leave this for part 3. But I guess by what standard is a belief wrong, or by what standard does a belief not correspond with reality? So I'm looking further if he would elaborate upon that.
Sure. There we go. This one.
we are against all harmful beliefs, and religion just is a big part of it. Any belief that doesn't match reality or is very far off from reality is harmful to society. So we are at war with all forms of beliefs that are harmful to society, including religion, which makes us anti-theist. But we are anti-dogma, we're superstition that is not even theism as well. Does that make sense?
Does that clarify?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have my own opinions on the subject, obviously, in regards to superstition. Personally speaking, I'm not quite superstitious myself. So I definitely understand some of these folk religions and whatnot. About dogma, I think it's an interesting thing, dogma, because it's sort of an example of low science in action. Because of course, there's a certain truth revealed through the mysteries. Obviously, people who really study a topic, not merely in religion, but those who sort of are the experts and spend their entire lives dedicated to studying about a certain subject. And I guess why dogma is actually a good thing, even though dogmatic is a slur or an insult, the reason why dogma is a good thing is because it's a progressive institution that effectively clues the person who's consuming the content as to how it's been formulated. So for me personally, I find dogma to be a wonderful thing. But I can't speak too much about superstitions because superstitions vary person to person.
Okay. And the next area we covered is secular humanism. I remember in the Remember 2 days ago when I talked about secular humanism being the guiding principles for some atheists
Oh, yeah.
rather than atheism itself, correct?
Oh, you did mention that, yeah.
Okay, let's do the same exercise here. What do you think secular humanism is?
I believe humanism actually is more of an outgrowth of Enlightenment theory, generally speaking. I guess that's my viewpoint on it. And secular humanism wouldn't be humanism within the confines of existing religious structures. It's more so atheist humanism, under a different name.
I'm asking because I'm going to show you in 2 seconds about what it actually is.
No
So
worries.
it's fine. If this is orders in, yes, this order is in correct order. Fantastic. Good.
Amazing.
Here we go. Let's do this. It's more complex than this, just for clarity's sake. But I'm doing this because of the time limitations and to not bore people out of their mind. And at the end of the day, this is all easy enough to find yourself. If anyone just interests you, you can just look this up yourself at the end of the day. Okay.
Got it.
Okay. Yes, I know it's been superseded, but still, it says to show some evolution of this, and just to yeah. Today, man's larger understanding of the universe, his scientific achievements, and deeper appreciation of brotherhood have created a situation in which requires a new statement, which means purpose of religion. So it's vital, fearless, and frank religion statement of the means and purposes of frank religion capable of bashing adequate sexual goals. Sorry, brain went weird for a second there. And personal satisfaction may appear to people as making complete break of the past. Okay. A. Affirmed following. First, religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. Second, humanism believes that man is part of nature and has emerged as part of a continuous process. Third, holding an organic view of life, humanists find the tradition of dualism of mind and body must be rejected. Humanism recognizes the man's religious culture and civilization, as clearly depicted by anthropology and history, are the product of gradual development due to the interaction with the natural environment and with the social heritage. The individual born into a particular culture is largely molded by that culture. Fifth, humanism asserts that nature of the universe, depicted by modern science, makes unacceptable any supernatural or cosmic guarantee of human values. That runs long. If you're listening to it, just go back now and just read the rest yourself. Sixth, we are convinced that time has passed for theism, deism, and modernism, and other variants of new thought. Yeah, as you can see, it's a long list. I will link this in the description. This is the successor here, where it expands on it. Knowledge of the world is derived by observation, experimentation, and rational analysis. Humanists find that science is the best method of determining this knowledge, as well as for solving problems and developing beneficial technologies. We also recognize the value of the new departures in thoughts, the arts, and in experience. Humans are an integral part of nature as the result of unguided evolutionary change. ethical values are derived from human need and interest as tested by experience. Life's fulfillment emerges from the individual participation in the service of humane ideals. Humans are social by nature and find meaning in relationships. Working to benefit society maximizes individual happiness. So far, any thoughts?
I find this one to be a lot more simpler, obviously, in structure than the previous one. And I was just
It's
thinking more about the first one. The first one is something that, for the most part, I'll disagree with personally. This one here is probably a bit more like neutral in terms of its actual like ideological bent.
okay. Here we go.
Lack of a better word.
Here we go.
Oh,
And then
okay.
and this is the one in between the two. In between two. I'm saying this just to give a general vague idea. And of course, if this interests you, it's interesting nevertheless. As you see, these are very lengthy texts, so if you're interested, you can look it up yourself. Is anything we read as I scroll through it, does any of these call out to you that I need to go over? Any so far, Mike?
Yeah, I find the interesting part about salvation. So it's just above
Which one?
ethics. Just a paragraph above ethics.
There we go.
Yeah.
Second,
Second.
promises of immortal salvation or fear of eternal damnation are both illusionary and harmful. They distract humans from present concerns, from self-actualization, and from rectifying social injustices. Modern science discredits such historical concepts as the ghost of the machine and the separatable soul. Rather, the science affirms that the human species is an emergence from natural evolutionary forces. As far as we know, the total proximity is the function of the biological organism transcending in a social and cultural context.
Okay, well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, but I'll try and like keep it a bit simple. I just kind of want to bring in a relevant concept here. We can bring it up on the screen for demonstration if you don't mind.
That's fine.
About the idea of immortal salvation or eternal damnation. If you don't mind looking up, there's an idea called Pascal's wager. And essentially, yeah.
I don't need to go up I know what it is, but for the sake of it, in a break, I'll put it up on the screen when you talk about it.
Okay, no worries. I could just explain it briefly. It's basically a game of chance, and the chances of there being eternal life, if you had to really place a bet on the roulette table, you're better off believing in eternal life, because the consequences, if it comes to fruition, are quite severe compared to if it doesn't come to fruition. So based on the probability of these events occurring and the chances thereof, it's better to place your bets on there being eternal life. So that's a certain framework you can use to justify
At the same
salvation
time, though,
or damnation.
not to, I'll expound this in the next section when we go into more open conversation. As right now, as I said, this is more directed focus. So
Yeah, can I say one more thing? Just
sure.
while we on that one, I won't make up a third point. Just the paragraph above ethics again, please.
Which one exactly? This one still?
Yeah, no. So it's just the second sentence. There's a lot there. Some of it I agree with, some of it I don't. But the second sentence where it says, they distract humans from present concerns, from self-actualization, and from rectifying social injustices. This sort of is dependent on the faith you actually believe in. Because, like, for instance, even within Christianity, there's sort of different faiths or different levels of faith. And one of these, like, for instance, in Protestantism, you're essentially justified by faith. So there's no need for works. There's no need to do good things. And the extreme point of view is that once saved, always saved, which is totally wrong. Because otherwise, what about Judgment Day? Why would there be a need for judgment? But I guess in regards, like into some other religions, like for instance Catholicism, this sentence doesn't really hold much water because a lot of the time there is a lot of works in Catholicism. So I would say that it's not exactly true in regards to
Mike,
we don't care about present concerns.
be prompt, and because I'm not saying you to shut up. I think we can go over this in the next section.
Okay, I'll try and remember it. Okay.
Yeah. And if you can't, I can bring it up in the next section anyway, and you can go into much more detail. It's fine.
No worries.
Anything else that is coming out here?
Oh, I mean, we could move on to the next definition if you'd like to do so. I imagine we don't have much time.
This is mostly the found definition. We can just go for we can just clarify one or two. There's still enough time to go through the final two things.
Ah, okay, no worries. Yeah, we talked about technology in point 1, so there's no need to talk about it again, I guess.
I'm guessing this is the most interesting part here.
All right.
The world cannot wait for reconciliation of competing political or economic systems to solve its problems. These are the times for men and women of goodwill to further the building of a peaceful and prosperous world. We urge that loyalties to an inflexible morality of and religious ideologies be transcended. We urge recognition of the common humanity of all people. We further urge the use of reason and compassion to produce the kind world we want, a world which peace, prosperity, freedom, and happiness is widely shared. Let's not abandon that vision in despair or cowardice. We are responsible for what we are or will be. Let us work together for a humane world by means with humane ends. Destructive ideologies, difference, and this is, and just to be perfectly clear, Mike, I'm not necessarily saying I believe in secular humanism. I'm just clarifying what it is.
Yeah, no doubt.
So destructive ideology, ideological differences amongst communism, capitalism, socialism, conservatism, liberalism, and radicalism should be overcome. Let us call for an end of terror and hatred. We will survive and prosper only in a world of shared humane values. We can initiate new directions for humankind. Ancient rivalries can be superseded by broad-based cooperative efforts. Yeah, I'm sure people can read the rest as it's quite an extensive thing.
Indeed.
Any concluding thoughts then from that?
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting because humanism, how it was typically understood for most of human history, was actually something that kind of moved in collaboration with the faith. Not quiet, of course, but it was definitely there. It was definitely a present aspect of faith. And I guess you can see how it's evolved to sort of leave the faith in a way. That it effectively is, as you said, a definition of atheism and a subset of atheist belief.
And that, yes, exactly. And that's why I said in the first part, it's people who are secular humanist are not guided by atheism. They're guided by secular humanism. And that's what I mean. That's what I mean by this. Because there's, as you can see, it's a whole system.
I do find one thing interesting, actually, how they said they wanted to move past modernism, because, I mean, generally speaking, this is sort of branching more into philosophy somewhat. So
10 minutes, Mike.
I won't drone on too much, but essentially speaking, humanism used to be a modernist philosophy for most of its history.
That's true. Okay, in that case, let's go to this one. And then here we go. And then you get stuff like this, right? This isn't necessarily it's a meh, think of it what you want. But this is just a little wild card thrown here. Just for the sake of it.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? And don't worry, you don't... yeah, here you go. I just like this because some of these I think is actually quite a good one in terms of some of these. One should strive to act with compassion and empathy towards all creatures in accordance with reason. 50-50 agree. Depends on the situation.
Yeah, I would actually bring up this point. It was actually raised by some YouTuber. He's really popular. His name's What Do You Mean? A Christian apologist. And it was kind of an odd thing that happened with Roe versus Wade. I won't get too political, because there's a lot of context behind this. But essentially, these guys, the Satanic Temple, they were really much pro-abortion, and then the argument they used for being pro-abortion is that it's actually against their ritual. Abortion is part of their ritual. So these guys, for me, they're definitely a religion, regardless of what they actually say.
That's regardless. The struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. And this is where, again, it's like, in principle, yes, but in reality, it's very muddied.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, ideally, you'd have the law, you'd have the social contract, that main law which actually governs how society operates and how people relate to each other. Ideally, that's working. Because if the social contract collapses and there's anarchy, then forget about it. No one's going to struggle for justice without an ethical framework that's somewhat objective.
Next, one's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will. I completely agree with that one. Absolutely agree with that one.
Yeah, I support bodily autonomy to the extent that it doesn't actually interfere on other people's bodily autonomy.
The freedom of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend, to willingly and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of others is to forego one's own. That's a meh. That's a
Yeah, it's quite bland. You can't really say much about it.
Belief should conform to one's best scientific understanding of the world. And to never care to distort scientific facts to fit one's beliefs. I think absolutely agree with that one.
I tend to think of science and religion being complementary in my case. I wouldn't really put one over the other. I think a lot of things in religion can be proven by science, but some can't. Some things can't be proven by science. So it requires a different level of faith.
Next, people are fallible. If one makes a mistake, one should do the best to rectify it and resolve any harm that might have been caused. And that's what I really like from this set here.
That's the ideal thing, yeah. The first thing is obviously to realize you've done something wrong. Then you can repent of it. You say sorry, apologize, and then you can try and atone for it and make up for your mistake.
Every tenet is a guiding principle designed to inspire nobility in action and thought. The spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word.
I wonder what word they're talking about here. Maybe the word of God.
They aren't necessarily targeting that. You understand the context. The context is there's extreme Christian fundamentalism in America. They are resisting fundamentalist Christianity in America because it's really dominant and intrusive.
I mean, for me personally, any so-called organization that has rituals is kind of like a faith.
Anyway,
their organization, if nothing else. Let's move on.
And there you go. And there you go. You can go over this before, and you got 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's about it, right? 10 Commandments. Number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. And essentially, what this is trying to say is that there's only one God in essence. I mean, there's many lesser gods, lowercase g, but we call them demons. Number 2, you shall not make idols. Okay, this one's actually really controversial, even within Christianity, because there's been different periods within the church history. So idols, there was an iconoclast period where they essentially broke down icons because, effectively speaking, people thought that any images of heaven shouldn't be shown within an icon. But really, an idol sort of lends into the first one. It's the depiction or worship of a god other than Yahweh in the Old Testament. Number 3. Now, this one's actually a funny one. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And believe me, Brennan, this happens way too much. If you put up a Netflix show, this is probably the first commandment that gets broken. What do you say about that? You got
There's
anything to say about number 3 in particular?
not right now, no. Just you got like 3 minutes, 40
Yeah, no worries.
seconds.
I
So
can
keep
I can
going.
make it. I can make it. Yeah, there's no problem. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now, this commandment over here, again, I should feel the need to explain. It shouldn't be taken literally. It shouldn't mean that you have to take a day off work within a week, because some people can't afford to take a day off work. It essentially, even though these commandments are implying for the man to follow God, this commandment in particular, number 4, is actually built for man. It's so people can preserve their energy and not be burnt out and actually recommune with God through nature. Number 5, honor your father and your mother. This one's really, really important for society. I can't think that anyone would actually oppose this in principle. Definitely respect your parents. They love you. Yeah,
I
it's
will
just pretty.
say, Mike, I'll say a huge goodbye to that. But I'll say it in the next section because there's only like 2 minutes, 30 seconds.
No worries. Number 6, you shall not murder. This one's pretty obvious. I can't see anyone finding this one offensive. Pretty much everyone agrees that you shouldn't murder, that murder isn't a good thing. The real debate about this commandment is the translation. Is it you shall not kill, or is it you shall not murder? For me personally, someone who's broken a lot of these, if not all, I say it's you shall not kill. But I guess it's sort of subjective. Is it a letter of the law? Is it a spirit of the law thing? Because some people believe that killing only belongs to God, and I'm one of those people. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. This one's actually a really fun one too. Adultery is translated as porneia, and porneia is it's a Greek word. It's the basis for porn. So adultery isn't just cheating on your husband or wife, believe it or not. Number 8, you shall not steal. This one, you can't really disagree with it. It's pretty cut and dry for the most part. You shall not bear false witness
Again,
against your...
though,
Okay,
sorry,
yeah.
Mike, again, I kind of have a cravat to that one as well. I'll say it in the next section.
Yeah, no worries. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. This one's actually really important when it comes to the law generally. So the 10 Commandments is merely sort of a screenshot of the law in the Old Testament. And effectively, testimony, which is a huge part of faith, and in establishing the truth, you always needed to have at least 2 or 4 people, 2 people, I think, to verify your claims in order to make it truth in a court of law. And finally, the last commandment is you shall not covet, which effectively ties into number 8, because a lot of people who want other people's property and goods will be tempted to steal. So 8 and 10 are somewhat related, as are 1 and 2 and several others. They all really feed into each other. It's to make a coherent belief system. Well, that's it for part 2. Stay tuned for part 3.
In terms of the progression, now we had atheism described, secular humanism described, anti-theism described, and theism described. What then does this mean in terms of the relationship online, and how, as I was saying in the beginning, the anonymous nature of online conduct can lead to more diverse relationships with it. And we have some side stuff to cover as well. We got some side sources as well, which we're going to cover, much less than the part before this, but still just interesting sources to say nevertheless. Okay then, Mike. In terms of the discussion around online conduct, do you think it's more of a cooperation or antagonism between theists and non-theists?
I believe that strictly speaking, online, it tends to fragment a lot more. It's generally speaking, the internet, in my view, it's sort of a microcosm of society. So society at its current level, being individualist, postmodernist, multiculturalist, there's many other cultures that are dominating on the internet. So there's not a single unified culture as there were in previous modernist countries such as Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany. So for me, I feel there's sort of a gap that is going to persist on the internet per se. What I think in general, however, is can there be room for collaboration, as the secular humanists say? And I'd say that it can only be achieved through agape love. That in some way you need to be able to love your enemy, for lack of a better word. And I wouldn't go, I think enemy is a strong word in this case because I feel in regards of the groups we've talked about, the Satanic Temple would be considered my enemy as a theist.
I guess so,
Um,
technically, but that's the point.
so for
And
me, as a
and
believer,
that's why
others, yeah.
I'm Mike. That's why I add it in, just for variety.
Yeah, no worries. I just feel in some way if you would consider atheists to be my enemy, I think that's a really strong word. I don't really feel
I'm
too
not saying
strongly about that.
I never said atheists are your enemy. I just said the Satanic Temple stuff. I just thought would be this funny wild card. That's all.
But I guess if we're having a debate about society at large, there's two ways to sort of frame the argument. The first argument is that if everyone shared a similar belief system or similar enough given the variance in individuality, would people promote peace? That's the first question. And sometimes I feel that a democracy is a good case to point that even if most people do share your value systems, there's still going to be wars in the world today. And personally speaking, I have the worldview that comes from a fallen world with fallen people in it. Everybody agrees on this point to some extent that the world isn't perfect and neither are people.
In terms of this,
And I
though,
feel that why democracy in particular lends itself to such terrible conflict.
there's reason for this because earlier this is I know this isn't necessarily to religion itself, but this is an interesting note. Because you were talking about just war before, right? It's just,
Yes.
I just thought it's interesting because under Marxism itself, they also have just war as a very fundamental part of the ideology.
And in some way, if you're an active participant within a war, you need to justify it
Of
to
course.
yourself. Hmm.
Keep going anyway. Keep going.
Yeah, no worries. And I believe the war in Ukraine is actually relevant to this discussion because it kind of shows that agape love is really necessary in order to bridge the gap and promote peace between people because even countries that have similar history to one another, Ukraine and Russia, they're both neighbors. They're both Orthodox countries for the most part. Yeah, Ukraine's a little more mixed than Russia. But it's mixed to the extent that Russia used to be an atheist country under communism. And I guess in some way they needed to make a decision. Are they going to prioritize real politics? So are they going to put the interests of this world, or are they going to essentially put aside their differences and think about the greater good, which is that they're going to cooperate with each other and both sides need to make a compromise. And I feel that's part of what agape love is. It's sort of the dialectical relationship between different people where you struggle on the things that you disagree with, you find unity in the things you agree with, and then finally there's a struggle as in which thesis is going to come out on top. And
And anyway, back to at least centralized point. Okay. In terms of the actual basic question itself about relationship between theism and non-theism, I'd say this heavily depends on the situation. Because between us, it's fine. For obvious, because of course, we have some very major disagreements which we haven't got to yet, but we will get to eventually, won't we?
Hmm.
But regardless, we can still maintain some form of civility despite our disagreements, right?
I think if a society is going to continue, it needs to have some form of agape love between different individuals and different ideas.
But the point I'm saying is about why it depends. That is simply due to the fact that while some systems itself lend to more antagonism, I would also argue that some degree of antagonism between theists and non-theists is necessary, especially when you're dealing with more fundamentalist theists.
I believe it necessary to the extent that it's going to happen regardless, not necessarily that it's something that has to be done or it's a lesser evil.
I would
That's my view.
the reason I say it has to be done is because the actual situation surrounding fundamentalism when it comes down to religion is that often it's like it's like the analogy, give them an inch and they'll take a mile, right? And the most fundamental religious stuff, if you give them 1 inch of territory, they will try and take over everything.
I actually believe in some way in regards to the faith, it's sort of an individual question, isn't it? It sounds a bit like a cop out to leave it to an individual to decide, but ultimately everyone has free will. I firmly believe that, and people believe this on both sides of the equation. So I think the mistake really comes in when we sort of look at it in more of a collectivist mind view, because if we look at it as sort of consensus in society being an accumulation of different individual viewpoints, that's when we really kind of fall into factional politics. And factional politics isn't really good for the unity of a nation. So my
And
theory is that in regards to all these moral issues you're talking about, the fundamentalists, I believe that it's up to the individual to really determine what's right from wrong. And if you're in the minority, to some extent, you should be allowed to practice your beliefs. And there's no issue being a minority within a democracy. It's only really become an issue if there's a tyranny of the majority.
in terms of sources, you linked the Roman Empire source. Why was that specifically?
Yeah, the Roman Empire is actually a really good example when it comes to factional
And
politics.
and also, Mike, I enabled you to share stuff, so you can share it.
Yeah, no worries. I'll bring up another point about ancient Rome in just a moment. Let me try and share the screen. But while we wait, I wanted to explain that one of the biggest issues which led to the rise of the Roman Empire and the subsequent fall of the Roman Republic was factionalism. And that's like a huge issue within democracy, that sort of division. And the reason why this actually caused the fall of the Roman Republic is that there was a certain principle within Rome, within the Roman Republic, that people had different beliefs, but they weren't necessarily going to fight over those beliefs. Physically, that is. There wasn't going to be violence. So there was a particular law that you weren't to attack your political opponent for any reason, unless it was within the Senate, that is. But going back to my main point, I guess, why Rome sort of really proves, despite what Edward Gibbon says on the topic, is pretty much the preeminent philosopher or historian of the fall of the Roman Republic. He says that Christianity actually led to the fall of the Roman Empire. We're talking about the Roman Empire in the West here, for clarification.
Of course.
Yes.
I,
And I would say, yeah, go
I,
ahead.
sure. On this point, though, I'd say only partially. Only partially. I would never say as a principal acted to the fall of the Roman Empire. The reason I'd say that is because, for example, right, in the Eastern Roman Empire, which later became the Byzantine Empire, they had basically Orthodox Christianity as a state religion. And were they collapsing? No, not really at all. And so I'd say the issue was more so not necessarily a matter of faith, because both Eastern and Western Rome successfully switched from a pagan scapegoat to a Christian scapegoat quite quickly. As a whole, the Western Empire, I think, fell more so due to internal corruption and the emperors no longer having power.
And partly for that is above the religion, they had a really shared culture, which modern societies don't actually have because it's so fragmented. There's subcultures within the dominant culture, and because of that, people don't necessarily identify with each other in the first place. And I believe what's so important about the Roman Empire and all these other great civilizations, the empires of the past, is it changed over time, but in some essence, there was a shared understanding that society had an objective ethical structure or an objective ethical code. And
Sure. Yeah, sure. But that's nothing special to do with Christianity itself. That was a standard even under paganism.
I do find it interesting, however, that with the pagan religions, I don't really agree on much with them. And in some regards, I actually agree with you more personally than the pagans. But the one thing that I do really appreciate about pagan societies, and I'm going to conclude my statement here, I would like to bring us over to the next source. An
Sure, that's fine.
anthropologist,
Yes, go ahead, that's fine.
Norris, an anthropologist by the name of J.D. Unwin. Not many people have heard about him. He's definitely a controversial anthropologist, even for his time, in the 1930s. And his idea was that the society, why civilizations lasted so long, was the point of marriage, essentially. And that's something that, even from the beginning of human civilization, and this is a little bit of a crass topic because people often talk about Adam and Eve. And it's like, sure, I don't disagree about the existence. Me personally, I mean, it's up to other people if they believe in Adam or Eve, Adam and Eve. But for me, the thing is that they weren't just boyfriend girlfriend, were they? They were actually married because marriage is something that's been since the beginning of human
That's
society.
debatable. That's honestly very, very debatable. It's very much.
I
Uh,
understand. I mean, it doesn't explicitly say so in the Bible, but there was, in the sense of marriage being a monogamous relationship for life, and there's no evidence to suggest that Adam wasn't monogamous, even though some Gnosticists say that he had Lilith as another wife. Anyhow, I digress. And essentially, Unwin's theory, he was trying to look at why societies fail, and there's actually many different reasons for why a society would fail. But one familiar topic that kept on coming up was actually a lack of sexual self-control. And unfortunately, what's happened now since the sexual revolution is that now, instead of sexual culture being unified under a shared common ethical code, now there's different subcultures of sex. So, for instance, there's not just vanilla, there's now kink, there's missionary, and all these other crass topics that I won't go into too much. And what's actually happened is that this is sort of cascaded. There's a snowball effect. So the lack of monogamy, which is a really small thing when you think about it, it shouldn't be that much of a thing that would affect society, you'd reckon. It should be the beliefs of a society and how the people actually behave. So what has happened is that with a reduction in monogamy, with a reduction of marriage, there's now less belief in God. So there's correlation. It's not necessarily causation. Correlation doesn't need to mean causation, but it's basically a perfect storm as to why society would fail. Because once we've attacked one aspect of the ethical code, which is monogamy, which is marriage, and now the basis for our ethical code has completely gone down the toilet, basically, because the basis for our ethical code
But the
was
thing is,
objective morality.
but his thing, Mike, the whole ethical code conduct was made. Honestly, it was always look, the whole thing about the ethical code being around God was due to other factors. It was more of a case where there wasn't much of community outside of religion. So people were forced into it more so. And with more options being available, people who generally don't believe and just want to operate in a more non-theistic way can now operate in a non-theistic way. So I'd say that for a long time it was basically forced adoption into theistic practices.
It's definitely an interesting theory. And I think what the record is showing is that can someone make an objective ethical code outside of God? Well, it's theoretically possible.
Yes, they
Because
can.
because there are shared values across humanity, across different cultures, across different religions, such as marriage, correct? Even in modern day Australia, marriage is a pretty big topic, or it used to be socially.
Because the thing is morals. The thing is about morals is that yes, of course you can make good morals outside of religion. The issue is in this case is that it's the theists themselves who want to say that all morality comes from God, then dismiss any other source.
I wouldn't say that. Yeah, I
Oh
think
no
that's
no no
going
no
too
no no
far.
no 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 no. Hear me out. There's a reason why I say that because people actually do believe in this.
Hmm.
Because some people actually think that any morality outside of God's morality is fake. And that is a actual position people still hold today.
What I find actually interesting, I don't mean to ignore your point, and actually I'll come back to it. What I find most interesting here is that the correlation between a lack of deism. So deism here is just general faith. That's a bit
Yeah,
misleading. Deism is
sure, that's
its own
fine.
subset of faith.
Deism, general faith, whatever, go with that. That's fine.
And I'm sort of speaking from personal experience here, so it's a bit of an anecdote. Is that for me, when I was growing in the early 2000s, it was still a modernist era. So in modernist era, there was in the culture, as far as I remember it, there was sort of an equilibrium between modern day thought, New Age, atheism. You wouldn't want to be lapped up with New Age, trust me, and traditional belief systems such as monotheism and marriage. And that goes with same-sex marriage. It was sort of a neutral thing. Most people supported it, but it wasn't actually in law yet. But what I find interesting is that they're using the 1970s as the barometer for when theism went on the decline, which I tend to agree with because the ethical code, the law of Moses was being eradicated around this time.
To
And I
be
find it
honest, though,
interesting.
but the thing is, to be honest, though, I think it's a kind of a good thing it was declining because it gave more. Because honestly, I don't see it as a negative.
I mean, it's debatable, really, because usually people who
I, I, I,
debate the
I,
law, they say it's boring, which
Be-
is kind of a weird thing to say.
because the thing is, if you're a theist and you see it declining, might you find it concerning? Yes. And in this case, they might find it concerning because it's a theistic site. And that's understandable, I guess. But for like everyone else who was basically forced into religious practices or communities due to other circumstances, it's a good thing. It basically gives people freedom they could not get under it basically state mandated religion or enforced social religion.
It's interesting because there's definitely repression in the 1950s and 60s of non-religious folk. I don't actually disagree with that. But what I guess I'll just leave my point on this is that in modernism, so if we can say modernism is up until the early 2000s, there was an equilibrium between Christian and atheist folk, basically. But look what's happened here. So we're talking about the replacement of an objective moral system, and now we're waiting for atheism to sort of step up in the absence of something that people don't actually believe in anything. So now the burden of proof is on atheism to actually produce a good moral system that'll keep society united instead of divided.
But that's the thing, that, as I said, atheism itself doesn't have a moral system. So
Well, that's the problem. I mean, if we're trying to unite
it's
society,
not really a problem. As I said very clearly so far, looking at it from a theistic sense, you're going to be very, very disappointed. Because yes, I'm maybe an atheist or theist, but your morality comes from elsewhere. Your morality as a non-theistic person comes from other systems. So let's say, for example, in my case, I'm an atheist communist.
Mm.
And my morality, for example, comes from the communism end, not atheism.
Okay, but I guess you know what I'm trying to say is that that's still
Yes,
an
I know what you're
attempt at
saying.
a ethical. Oh, okay. No worries.
I'm just saying that waiting on atheism itself, like atheism as the thing to have a set universal moral system, that would never happen. It still has never happened. But that doesn't mean it's a failure. It's that atheism never had that system.
And so you think, I mean, it's not really a difference of opinion here. It's more of an objective fact that as society like goes on, we're heading more towards the end of history now, one way or another. Like regardless of what we think, end of history being a classless society in communism or being the apocalypse in Christianity. And as we move towards the end of society becomes more and more fragmented because the culture itself is becoming more and more fragmented. And what's happened is that in the past, what we've had underpinning culture basically, we had laws, values, moral values, and in some way we all agreed on the objective truth at a certain point of time. Not everybody, but 95% of people. And I just feel that in a way we're in a negative trend at the moment. So the more we go away from deism,
I might just say that for a second. For example, shared objective truth standard for truth. Look, even if religion loses its grasp, even if deities and the belief of deities declines, there will still be a shared objective standard for truth made in another way. Because that's the thing, though. That's the thing people understand. You and others think it's created by God, and it's God moralities. But at the end of the day, it's still a morality in which is human-made and can be changed by humans. And therefore, the shared objective standard for truth can just changes and molds with time. So I'd say, in many ways, that the whole argument surrounding like decline of theism being a non-moral time is wrong. This is a shift away from a theistic supremacy, if you get what I mean.
What I said in the first video, that I sort of judge something by its works. And for the most part, there aren't any good works being produced nowadays, or at least there's not as many good works as there were being produced in the past. So I'll reserve judgment for the moment. I'll reserve judgment for the moment. But effectively, I feel that we've sort of gone past the equilibrium stage and we're going into another form of extremism, where we're heading into the postmodernist era and we're heading in a post-truth world, where the truth is whatever you want to believe in, basically.
But the thing is, though, at the same time, Mike, it always was that way. It always was whatever you want to believe in a mass psychosis. It always was that. It always was that way. That hasn't changed. People want to say it's postmodernism now, sure, but is it any different from in the past where people just adopted a massive culture? No, not really. They just adopted a culture, lived with it, moved on, died, moved on. The culture was there. It was a made-up culture to the most part. The culture was there to have stability, order, or power. It was always superficial to that extent. It still is to a degree superficial.
That actually forms part of my critique, and I'll actually end it here by saying that we live in a society of abundance here in the 21st century. We live in the first world. And a big issue is that we think we can have our cake and eat it too. So we want to have fun and we also want to have an effective society. But the problem is that all of these societies in the past, yeah, are they like pretty boring? Sure. But they're also the most effective societies. And I'll finish my argument and conclude by saying that the idea that a civilization will fail because people have different viewpoints isn't necessarily so.
Oh yeah.
The reason,
In terms of that, I agree. In terms of that, I agree.
hmm,
Yes, if you have different viewpoints, that doesn't necessarily mean it will fail. It'll be different. But actually, what causes failure, for example, is very different classifications. Continue.
but going in for a certain level of traditionalism, the construction and agreement of different individuals on a shared objective ethical code, I really feel that we need that together with traditionalism to actually create a civilization that's going to last the test of time. Now, don't get me wrong, all civilizations are going to fail. Humanity is going to perish in the physical sense, if not the spiritual. But the good news is that we have the gospel to rely on for us who do believe, and that, as you said, we find good in all people, and that we have universal values regardless of our denomination.
I would say, I'd say some, I'd say sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Depends
Hmm.
on sex. Well, depends what sect you're in.
Yeah.
I mean, some Christians are so opposed.
I'll leave it to you now, to share a couple of sources.
Sure. Can you turn yours off
No
then?
worries, I'll turn mine off, of course.
I only really have one source,
Okay.
and it's this one. It's just an interesting side thought about purity culture, and I'll just take up the last 10 minutes just
Yeah,
talking about this general discussion. That's fine.
no worries.
Um, how then do you think about purity culture?
I think purity culture is an interesting thing because it's more about the journey, not the destination. And I think that's what people really like lose focus on. They focus on the destination, but not the journey. So it's basically like, what are you doing right here now to actually follow your beliefs and be a good example of them in practice?
I would, yeah. Anyway, this is a thing where this is where why I say there needs to be a lot of constraint with and laws around religion. So I'll get to that much more later. Um, but for example, it's like this: the purity culture movement in America, for example,
Hmm.
that is a complete train wreck.
You know what doesn't
And
help too? The confusion, because there's like different teachings within the school. I mean, I've never personally been confused, but
no, no, it's not that. It's the Christian side of purity culture and what it advocates. I think is really harmful. And that aspect of it, I think, is something in which there needs to be a strict adherence that purity culture itself needs to be suppressed.
and how would you essentially provide a framework for self-control as opposed to purity culture, an alternative to the existing
Um,
solution.
the reason I'm saying this because this is an academic article here talking
Mhm.
about purity culture, right?
Okay.
How basically purity culture 90% of the time basically has men domineering over women. And the actual implications of that is very, very bad. I've literally heard someone who's supposed to be a sex counselor literally not think they have a clitoris at all, even if she
Oh.
did.
Hmm.
And that was due to purity culture.
Hmm. So I guess what you're trying to say in some ways, you require sex education to be compulsory at a certain stage in the person's development. I mean, there always is sex education, but is it based on purity or is it based on knowledge, I guess?
Knowledge. I would
Mm-hmm.
say knowledge. Because purity culture, as you can see here, has seriously destructive tendencies.
Yeah, I think the double standard is actually a really good point. I have to agree. I mean, if we want to be objective about this, you need to judge people by the same standard, regardless of gender.
For example,
Yeah.
right, in the conclusion, due to lack of control over their own bodies and sexualities, young women fail to recognize and act on their own sexual desires due to purity movement. Suppressing sexual nature is not only unfair, but in many cases impossible. Purity movement advocates do not believe the idea that sexual desire and activity is normal for those who are not married. That's where, and that's where it gets really fucked up because then they have an idea that there's a on switch for sexuality. And no, this isn't a scapegoat. This is very real of an opinion, which is actively upheld.
Mm-hmm. And what
Um,
would you think? I'll just step in if you don't mind.
sure.
Oh, okay. I just think what in regards to the fact that okay, people have different partners, especially nowadays, and it generally tends to revert to the mean. So on average, an adult person is more likely than not married rather than not married. So is it that detrimental to essentially limit sex to only marriage? Because at the end of the day, after a while, they're only
I'll
going to be
say it
having
is, yeah.
sex with one person. Okay.
I'll say overall it is detrimental. If you ban sex outside of marriage, that's not good.
Hmm.
Because the thing is, I think marriage itself should not be forced either.
No.
Marriage, if you want to get married, is fine. But people need to understand, marriage itself is also a trap. If you're having like sex on the blackmail of marriage, you are an evil person.
Hmm. There's some subjectivity towards that. It's a weird one. Essentially, the idea would be that to submit to your wife or husband, how it's understood traditionally, is that it needs to be done with your consent to actually submit. But it's also
Consent.
sort of an obligation.
Yeah, sure, consent, absolutely. But my point is that sex outside of marriage should not be seen as a sin or crime. Because at the end of the day, not everyone should get married. Not everyone wants to get married. That's my core point. And at the same time, purity culture as well should not be advocated for as well, because the destructive tendencies, especially on the woman, which it actually dehumanizes very badly, is severe.
It's a tough one, sexual politics, because in some way, if you want to actually advocate for like the best solution for society, if you're looking at the collectivist agenda, you're going to be pushing marriage, because one of J.D. Unwin's arguments is that those in a marriage essentially, not that they have less sex, but they sort of channel their sexual energy towards creativity, and creativity is a huge part of why
But
societies continue.
But that's the thing, though. That can happen with or without marriage. Partnerships without marriage can still have the same impact.
I'm not quite sure, really. I mean, that's not what the historical record says,
It's
according to
the
Atheist
reality.
research.
Okay, the reality is, what's the real difference between a unmarried relationship versus a marriage? Not honestly, not that much. It still has the same functionality of both. They both have a very similar functionality. The end result is that a long-term relationship where a long-term relationship and a marriage, yes, you can have children, you can have shared assets, houses, everything like that. The only difference between the two is legal rights and other benefits. That's it. In terms of like, if you want to judge it on like effects of like behavioral sciences, no, there's not that much difference either. Because a husband and wife act the same way as a boyfriend girlfriend or girlfriend girlfriend boyfriend boyfriend in a long-term relationship.
It's
In
an
reality,
interesting thing, marriage, because obviously it's a contract in and of itself, and then society itself is basically a whole bunch of contracts. Not just economic, I mean the contract, social contract.
and ultimately, I think this is said it really good here.
Okay.
We need separation of church and state because it's not fair for teenage kids to be exposed to the Bible's teachings if they are not religious to begin with. We need to give kids the proper tools to be able to act responsibly while emphasizing that sex can lead to serious consequences such as pregnancy or STIs. Not that no man will want to marry a young woman if she has premarital sex and that she is damaged goods. We need to teach young women that they are more than a hymen, that they're a person with talent, intelligence, and have a personality. And that's really important.
I mean, it's up to the parents too, isn't it? I mean, the parents are the ones who actually decide whether they go to Bible class or not. At least in Australia, I can't speak for the American example.
Either way, though, less than a minute. Do a closing statement.
No worries. I think that what we've proven today is that atheists and Christians can actually work together, and that in some way we have more common than what actually divides us. And it's so important to think about things objectively, not to be too passionate. Realize how we're not so angry during this debate. We're getting along really well. And then that's how we're able to always two brains are better than one.